Dominus vobiscum, amigos, and welcome back to this third part in our series on Humanae Vitae, the encyclical which covered human love and birth control. So we've laid the kind of foundational underpinnings which this encyclical uses as it moves forward and examines life and married love and everything. In this episode, we'll kind of wrap things up and talk a little bit more about the practical applications of all of that. Previously, we had discussed how married love is faithful, free, total, and fruitful. And we also discussed how the marital act is both unitive and procreative. It's unitive for the spouses and procreative, bringing forth additional lives in the human race and the gift of children. When it comes to why the Church views birth control as being wrong and evil, this artificial contraception as being morally incorrect, I think we can go back to John Paul II, obviously the great pope of the last decade that a lot of people really loved, respected, and revered. He wrote so eloquently about human love. That was really kind of the central linchpin of a lot of his teachings, of course doing the theology of the body and other things. So when we look back at what he said about this, he wrote in favor of something that he called the personalistic norm, which viewed the human person. That is why it was personalistic. And he wrote that this personalistic norm was in opposition to what he called the utilitarian ethic. And what the utilitarian ethic was that I could use things for my own best purposes. I could use things in order to make things better for me. I could use this thing or this person as an end or rather as a means to my own ends. That was what the utilitarian ethic was. And the personalistic norm was him saying, no, a human person is an end only, never as a means to an end. So what he said was that this human person that we have is a good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. That was what he said. And what he meant by that was that any attempt to manipulate the human person, any attempt to divorce certain aspects of the human person for some end, whether it's for greed, whether it's for lust, whether it's for personal gain or glory or anything like that, that was always wrong, because a human person made in the image and likeness of God was to be an end in themselves. That was what the personalistic norm was. And when we apply that to what we see in Paul VI's letter, Humanae Vitae, what we see is a very clear echoing of that. That when we use artificial contraception, we are taking certain aspects of the person, but leaving others. We're removing the fruitful aspect of married love. And by so doing, a lot of times we think, oh, well, it's just the married or the fruitful aspect of this married love. I'm just not having children, and that's the decision that we're making right now. But when we think about it, it really damages all of those aspects of marriage, because my love can no longer be total. If I'm saying that I'm going to take all of you, I'm going to give all of myself to you, but not this aspect of your fertility, not this aspect of my fertility, we're divorcing certain parts of ourselves and of our spouse, our husband or our wife, away. And we're saying that, well, I'm going to take all of these things and I love you in these certain contexts, not in this one. Instead, I'm going to treat your fertility like it's some sort of problem, like it's an impediment to our love, like this thing which is so natural and so intimately a part of you it's going to be kicked by the wayside because it doesn't fit with our plan right at the moment. This is why that artificial birth control is immoral, because it takes particular aspects of the person and removes them and pushes them to the side and says, no, we're going to take dominion over this. we are going to use this part of ourselves for the unitive but not the procreative part, which is so intimately stamped into who we are and what our bodies are, and then what that communicates to the world. God is the author of life, and he allows us to partake in his creative efforts through the marital union, through the bearing and bringing up of children. But by artificial contraception, we deliberately take dominion over that. We're no longer participators, but instead we are trying to manipulate and make ourselves lord over this. That's why this artificial contraception is immoral. And the Pope goes on to say a very classical statement in Catholic theology, that no matter how good a good is, we might not do evil so that good may come of it. And what he's saying there is that we can't compromise here. It's either all of it or none of it. By doing something that we know that is evil to try to accomplish some good, we are in fact not really truly doing good at all. Instead, we're cooperating with evil. So what we see here is this divorce between certain aspects of the human person. And even if our intentions aren't necessarily evil, like we're intending to use our spouse or anything like that, there is still an aspect that does not fully respect the beauty and the intelligent and perfect and wonderful design of the human person in the act of artificial contraception. Okay, so what does that mean? What do we do from here? You know, that sounds great and everything, but there are legitimate situations where it's like, you know, we're too stressed right now for another child. There's just, you know, we have 3 kids that are under the age of 5. It's just, there's so much going on at work. I'm, you know, in between jobs, and, you know, it's not really clear where the next paycheck is going to come from and everything. So what then? Does that mean that Catholic families are supposed to have, you know, 18 children straight out of the gate, and that's supposed to be like the norm? Well, the Pope goes on to say that responsible parenthood is essential. And what does he propose there? He proposes something called NFP, or Natural Family Planning. And what NFP is it's a method that looks at the infertile periods of a woman's cycle. It looks at what's happening in her body. And from that, there are things that can be learned about her health, about what's happening with her. And there are, like I said, natural infertile periods where, you know, that's when we can truly engage in this unitive act without necessarily the great chance of conceiving a child. Because, like I said, maybe there are times where it's, you know, genuinely not a good time for the spouses. And that's where we're supposed to have recourse to. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is that NFP is not the rhythm method that you heard about. It's not like I'm going to count this many days and blah, 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 and then, you know, if the stars and the moon are right, you know, that's not it at all. It's extremely scientific. It's been shown to be well over 95% effective when it's used correctly. And in a lot of ways, there's beauty in it. Because of this, because it requires that the spouses communicate with one another. It says that I have to talk with you. Are we ready to have another child? Is my wife stressed at this point? There's a reason that couples that use NFP, the divorce rate is way closer to 1% than it is to 50%. Because there's a communication, there's a trust, there's a respect, and there's a discipline that's associated with that. Because we truly have to look at things, communicate with each other, and there's a back and forth discussion, which is so lacking in so many marriages. When it comes to sex in the modern world, what does the Pope say will happen if we embrace this contraceptive mentality? Paragraph 17 lays it out, and I'm just going to read some of these things that he's saying. that responsible men can become more deeply convinced of the truth of the doctrine laid down by the Church on this issue if they reflect on the consequences of methods and plans for artificial birth control. Let them first consider how easily this course of action could open wide the way to marital infidelity and a general lowering of moral standards. He goes on to say a couple of additional things that he predicts would happen. He starts saying that men would forget the reverence due a woman, and that objectification would become far more common, would occur far more readily. He goes on to say that it would open the door for marital infidelity, and from that you can extrapolate divorce, the breakdown of the family, children who maybe they aren't even open to marriage because they experienced something that wasn't very pleasant when they were young. You know, mom and dad fought all the time, or dad went far away and left everybody. Then he goes on to say, too, that governments could begin to coerce people for population control and for the benefit of society. And when we look at these things, we can't really help but see a reflection in the modern society, I think. These things stand as a stark reminder that, these things were predicted. They were laid out in this in 1968, back when the divorce rate was much lower than it is now, and when rates of marital happiness were higher than they are now in general. But here's the good news. The Church proposes throughout the ages this teaching on human sexuality, this teaching on what a human person is and what the meaning of sex is in relationship to this beautiful doctrine of human sexuality and human personhood. It hasn't been forgotten, but it has been rejected by a lot of people. And it's okay if you want to reject it, but I don't think that people have really given it a fair shake. I don't think that people have rejected it intelligently. A lot of times people have said, oh, well, that's Bronze Aged, that's, puritanical prudery or something like that. They've said that, this could never work in the modern world. This doesn't make any sense for modern living. But instead, the Church continues to cry out for this call to true love, true fidelity, and true marriage in the context of the family. It calls out for discipline, for respect, for integrity in all of our human faculties. It proposes a way forward for true love, to communicate effectively, to love ardently, and to view the human person with greater depth than it often is today. That we don't always view our neighbors truly as children who are created in the image and likeness of God. We don't truly view them as brothers and sisters in Christ. The sexual ethic of the Church is so intimately related with all of the other teachings about who God is and about who we are. So I invite you, even if it's something that, you never may have thought about before, maybe it's something that seems ridiculous to you, but I invite you to really enter into this, because even in the 3 sets of videos, I cannot possibly do justice to the Church's beautiful, meaningful teachings on what human love is. With that, I thank you for joining me. I hope that I helped you in some way. Let me know if I can go in any deeper on any topics, and stay in the state of grace, and may God bless you. Thanks.